How were some of those conversations initiated in terms of reproductive health with your children?
So for my daughter, actually, she had a friend who started her period early, so that was quite early for me. I wasn't ready for that conversation, and the friend had spoken to my daughter about it, and she was inquisitive, and I think she was only about 10, so I would have probably not had that conversation until maybe 11 or starting secondary school, and so that instigated a conversation, and we had the whole talk about the menstrual cycle. When they were younger, I bought a book, and I think it was called The Body Works, and just kind of given it to them in turn to have a little look and read, and then we had a chat about that afterwards, and that was just, is there anything that you don't understand? Is there anything that you need explaining? Have you any questions really? But on a very informal, casual kind of, it wasn't an interrogation or a discussion, it was just a chat about the book and if they had any questions.
Okay, great. And now that your children are sort of more grown up, do you still talk to them about reproductive health or sex, or was it more of a sort of one-off conversation when they were younger?
It was probably a one-off informative conversation when they were younger, and then lots of be careful when they went out the door, and you know, watch what you're doing, and if you are, be careful, but not in depth after that. It was sort of, yeah, just general over worrying mother and father comments as they flew out the door.
It's been really, really difficult. I mean, they're 23, 24 now, and even now it's something they don't openly want to talk about. So what I've done over the years is sit and have conversations with them, taken every opportunity there is to mention things, and just kind of drip feed, always giving them a choice as to whether they get information from me or they want it from somewhere else. I've checked in with them really about as to what they know, and asked them where they might have picked it up. They've picked a lot up from watching things, but they don't really have friends either, so they've not had that friend network to bounce off. So it's been a really tricky one, and I probably couldn't say 100% that we've overcome it. I think it will be something for them. It's something I worry about. It's something that in terms of sexual health, I don't think they're aware of a lot of things. And yeah, it remains a concern and something I think that I fear for them a little bit on it.
In your opinion, what do you think it is about the maybe neurodivergent brain that makes it so hard to like access conversations, or maybe want to engage in conversations about sex and their bodies?
I think there's and without wanting to be, you know, kind of making general sweeping statements, but I think the neurodiverse brain can be quite limiting, so it only allows you to think in certain ways, and I think if you then couple that with emotional history and emotional trauma and things, then some of those things become incredibly difficult to access. So if you kind of pile those things together, you're going to get somebody who absolutely just can't go there, and somebody who takes things very literally may well then go, right, you don't talk about this, you don't talk about that, and therefore that becomes their way of working. So you don't talk about, so my children really struggled to swear, and actually at 14, 15, one of them said, when are we going to be allowed to swear? Because as younger children, they'd been told that you didn't swear. They couldn't rid themselves of that through mixing with peers, through going to school, through just a natural process, which is what happens with your neurotypical kind of brain. So lots of difficulties there, I think. But I think, yeah, that particularly with my twins, there's a rigidity there that stops them from accessing some of that.
So do you think in some ways maybe that kind of concept of sex and talking about bodies in a very sort of intimate or personal way was maybe seen as taboo for them? Or
yeah, and I know it was, and that's probably partly down to their upbringing. We've always been quite I've been quite open, but also quite sure about telling them how to respect things and how to you know, you don't openly talk about things that are private. I think a lot of it also comes from their early years and their shame around themselves.
So thinking about you having conversations with your children about sexual health and reproductive health, were there any challenges or barriers that you faced when doing so?
I think at the time I remember trying to find words that they would understand, that I wasn't embarrassed to use. I might have been a bit embarrassed about certain terminology, so I kept it very simple. But talking about it now, I wasn't embarrassed, and I was just concerned that I was using the right terminology and being correct, because obviously it's a long time ago since I spoke about it with my parents.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of the terminology, which, did you kind of take the more scientific approach, or, what caused some of that embarrassment for you?
Yeah, so I did take the scientific approach, because as they were growing up, they have different names for their body parts, and I found it easier to talk
to the boys about that, and like sort of educate them around what an accusation is, or what the risk was.
I can't really remember, to be honest. I mean, as far as I'm aware, they've both been to uni, so obviously I don't know what happened when they were at uni in terms of relationships, or they had relationships, as far as I know, that were long-standing relationships. Whether they had short-term relationships while they were at uni, or what, I don't know, and we've not talked about that. Mm-hmm. Because they were in quite long-term relationships, I suppose conversations, as relationships develop, you start having conversations more about how intense the relationship is, and if they're thinking about having a sexual relationship, and ensuring that they're protected, mm-hmm. and that they're aware of that protection. So yeah, and I think also just making sure that they were aware about if they were in the house on their own and things like that. I was always aware, or talk to them about not going off to bedrooms and things where there was nobody, mm-hmm. just those sorts of things really, mm-hmm. just about being aware about what they were doing and where they were doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, completely. When you were talking about like speaking to James when he was younger, what do you think the barrier was for him to receive that sort of serious conversation that you were trying to have about sex?
Well, he didn't come across as if he knew an awful lot, so I think he was quite naive, he was quite innocent, he was quite young. I think it was probably embarrassment and just a bit of like, oh mum type stuff. I think my husband has probably spoke to them as well, as a man-to-man sort of chat. I suppose it's a bit men-to-men chat are different to mum-to-son mm-hmm. chats, aren't they? Mm-hmm. Maybe, yeah, I don't know what he said, we haven't really talked